They thought they could fire me 2 days before the $2 million deal I negotiated closed and still keep the deal. What they didn't realize: the client's trust was in me, not in their logo. My name is Jenna Marlowe. I'm 36, and I'm the reason that acquisition went sideways. Right into my hands. I remember that morning like it was yesterday. The Chicago skyline was visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Cavernix Systems' downtown office. I was reviewing the final contract details for what would become the largest B2B sale in our company's history, a $2 million acquisition of our enterprise software solution by a European conglomerate. After 18 months of negotiations, countless video calls at odd hours to accommodate the time difference with Amsterdam, and more cups of coffee than I care to admit, we were finally going to close the deal. I should have known something was wrong when I noticed Bryce Hanley, our newly appointed CEO, huddled with someone I'd never seen before in the conference room. Their eyes followed me as I walked to my desk, but I was too focused on the impending deal to pay much attention. The letter of intent was signed, and we were just 48 hours away from finalizing everything. When I joined Cavernix 3 years ago, it was a struggling startup with a decent product but no real market penetration. I was the first to recognize the potential in the automated logistics space, and I single-handedly built a pipeline of over 40 clients. Back then, we had no established sales processes, no technical documentation, and certainly no foothold in the B2B market. I created demo models, wrote technical specifications, and handled sales meetings wearing every hat necessary to land our first major clients. My background in both technology and business development made me uniquely qualified to bridge the gap between what our engineers could build and what enterprise clients actually needed. It wasn't just about selling software, it was about solving real problems for real companies. The deal with the Dutch logistics company was my crowning achievement. I'd met their operations director at a conference in Berlin, and despite our company's relative obscurity, I convinced him to run a pilot program. That initial trial led to conversations with their parent company, which ultimately resulted in the $2 million acquisition we were about to finalize. I was still mentally rehearsing my presentation for the final signing meeting when Lisa from HR appeared at my desk, her expression unnaturally neutral. "Jenna, could you join us in the conference room? Bryce wants to discuss something important." I nodded, assuming it was last-minute details about the deal. Perhaps they wanted to review the presentation or discuss the celebration plans. I grabbed my tablet and followed Lisa, completely unaware that I was walking into an ambush. The conference room felt colder than usual. Bryce sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. Beside him was the stranger I'd noticed earlier, a man in his 50s with steel-rimmed glasses and a leather portfolio. "Jenna, this is Martin Keyes," Bryce said without preamble. "He's a restructuring consultant we've brought in to help prepare for our Series C funding round." I extended my hand, but Martin merely nodded, not bothering to stand. That was the first red flag. "Please, sit down," Bryce continued, gesturing to a chair across from them. "We need to discuss some organizational changes." My stomach tightened as I took my seat. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. "As you know, we're positioning Cavernix for significant growth following this European deal," Bryce began, his voice eerily calm. "To attract the right investors for our Series C, we need to streamline our operations and demonstrate operational efficiency." I nodded slowly, still not grasping what was coming. "After careful consideration, we've decided to eliminate your position, effective immediately." The words hung in the air between us. I blinked, certain I had misheard. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" I managed, my voice barely audible. "We're letting you go, Jenna," Bryce repeated, more firmly this time. "The restructuring consultant has identified several redundancies in our organization, and your role is one of them." "Redundancies?" I echoed, incredulous. "I'm the director of strategic development. I built our entire B2B client base from nothing. I'm the one who secured the $2 million deal we're about to sign." Bryce shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "The deal is already secured. The relationship has been transferred to our account management team. Your contributions have been valuable, but the company needs to evolve." I looked from Bryce to Martin, and back again. Reality slowly dawning on me. This wasn't about restructuring or operational efficiency. This was about the money. My contract included a performance bonus clause, 6% of any deal I brought in. On a $2 million acquisition, that meant $120,000. By firing me before the deal officially closed, they were saving themselves a significant payout. "This is about my bonus, isn't it?" I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is a business decision," Martin interjected, speaking for the first time. "Nothing personal." Nothing personal. As if the 3 years I'd poured into building this company from scratch were just an impersonal business transaction. "You're making a mistake," I said quietly. "The Dutch team trusts me. I've been their point of contact for over a year. You can't just swap me out 2 days before signing." "It's already been handled," Bryce replied dismissively. "Lisa will escort you to clear out your desk. Your access to company systems has already been revoked, and we'll need your laptop and company phone before you leave." I sat there, stunned into silence. They were cutting me out completely, no transition, no handover, nothing. Just a clean excision, as if I'd never existed. As Lisa led me back to my desk, where a cardboard box already waited, I felt a strange calm descend over me. This wasn't just unfair, it was stupid. Cavernix wasn't just losing me, they were jeopardizing the very deal they were trying to secure. Because what Bryce and his consultant didn't understand was that the Dutch conglomerate wasn't buying our software because of the Cavernix logo or some feature list. They were buying it because of me, because I had personally solved integration problems their IT team thought impossible, because I had been on calls at 3 a.m. when their systems crashed, because I had built trust through consistent delivery on every promise I made. As I packed my personal items into the box family photos, a succulent plant I'd kept alive against all odds, and a coffee mug from my first successful client, I made a decision. This wasn't going to be the end of my story with the Dutch company. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. The moment I left the Cavernix building, I pulled out my personal phone and made a call to Lucas Bremer, the development director at the Dutch conglomerate and my main contact throughout the negotiations. "Lucas, it's Jenna. Do you have a minute? Something's happened that you need to know about." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a coffee shop 2 blocks from my former office, explaining the situation to Lucas over video call. His expression darkened as I spoke. "They fired you 2 days before we signed," he asked, disbelief evident in his voice. "Without any transition plan." "That's right," I confirmed. "Apparently, I'm a redundancy they can no longer afford." Lucas ran a hand through his hair, visibly agitated. "This is unacceptable, Jenna. Our board approved this acquisition largely based on your involvement. You're the one who understood our integration needs and customized the solution accordingly." "I know," I said, taking a sip of my coffee to steady myself. "And I suspect they let me go specifically to avoid paying my performance bonus on the deal." Lucas was silent for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "So they expect us to proceed with the acquisition without you involved?" "That seems to be the plan," I replied. "But I have a different proposal." Lucas raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "I'm listening." "What if I told you I could deliver a better solution than Cavernix One that addresses all your needs, with enhanced security features and none of the integration problems we've been working through?" "Through a different company?" Lucas asked. "Through my own company," I said, the idea solidifying as I spoke. "I know exactly what your organization needs because I've spent the last year learning every detail of your operations. I know which features are essential and which are just bloat in the Cavernix system." "You're proposing to build a competing product," Lucas clarified, leaning closer to his camera. "Not exactly competing," I corrected. "Better, more tailored to your specific needs, without the corporate overhead and with a more responsive support system, and I'd personally oversee the implementation just as you expected in the original deal." Lucas sat back in his chair, considering. "How quickly could you deliver?" "Give me 6 weeks," I said, with more confidence than I perhaps should have felt. "I'll have a prototype ready for your team to evaluate." "And the cost?" "The same as the Cavernix deal, but with better terms, no hidden fees for support or customization? Lucas nodded slowly. I'll need to discuss this with the board, but I think they'll be interested, especially when I explain how Cavernix handled this situation. As we ended the call, I felt a surge of adrenaline. What had started as one of the worst days of my professional life was transforming into an opportunity I'd never dared to imagine. I had $180,000 in savings enough to get started, and I knew exactly which of my former colleagues were both brilliant and undervalued at Cavernix. By the end of that day, I'd registered Marlowe Solutions LLC, reached out to 2 former coworkers who had been similarly sidelined at Cavernix, and made an appointment with an angel investor who had expressed interest in my work at a tech conference the previous year. The next morning, as Cavernix was undoubtedly scrambling to prepare for their meeting with the Dutch team, I was already sketching the architecture for a new system. I knew where the weaknesses in the Cavernix solution were, the integration points that always caused problems, the security vulnerabilities their development team kept deprioritizing, the user interface elements that confused clients. My former colleagues Alex, a brilliant back-end developer who had been repeatedly passed over for promotion, and May, a UX designer whose innovative ideas were consistently ignored, joined me within days. We set up shop in my apartment, converting my dining room into an impromptu development studio. While Cavernix was still wondering why the Dutch conglomerate had suddenly gone silent, postponing the signing meeting with vague excuses about internal reviews, we were building the foundation of something better. The angel investor, Catherine Winters, didn't just provide capital, she gave us access to her network of tech professionals and a small office space in her building. With her backing and my savings, we secured enough runway for 6 months of development. I won't pretend the next 6 weeks were easy. We worked 16-hour days, fueled by takeout and determination. There were moments of doubt, late nights when a particular feature wouldn't work, or when I woke up at 3 a.m. wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake. But then I'd remember Bryce's dismissive tone, the way they'd tried to cut me out of a deal I'd built from nothing, and my resolve would harden. This wasn't just about revenge or money. It was about creating something true to my vision, something that actually solved the problems I'd spent years understanding. 5 weeks and 3 days after being fired, I presented our prototype to Lucas and his technical team. The interface was cleaner, the integration points were smoother, and the security architecture was significantly more robust. We'd built it using open-source components, which not only reduced costs but also eliminated the proprietary lock-in that had been a sticking point in the original negotiations. Lucas's lead engineer, a skeptical man who had raised the most questions during our previous demonstrations, spent an hour testing edge cases in silence. Finally, he looked up from his laptop and simply said, "This is better. Much better." 2 days later, Lucas called with the news their board had approved a 3-year contract with Marlowe Solutions for $2.4 million, $400,000 more than the original deal with Cavernix. They were particularly impressed with the security architecture, Lucas explained, and the fact that we'll have direct access to the development team rather than going through account managers. "What did you tell Cavernix?" I couldn't help asking. Lucas chuckled. "Just that we'd decided to go in a different direction. They've been calling daily, but, well, it seems their account management team doesn't have the answers to our technical questions." I felt a moment of vindication, but it was quickly replaced by something else, a sense of responsibility. This wasn't just about proving Cavernix wrong anymore. 10 people now depended on Marlowe Solutions for their livelihoods, and a major European company was trusting us with a critical part of their infrastructure. The contract was signed the following week. As I watched Lucas add his signature to the document, I thought about the conference room at Cavernix where I'd been fired just 2 months earlier. I wondered if Bryce had any idea what his business decision had cost his company. I got my answer 3 weeks later when a former colleague still at Cavernix messaged me their Series C funding had fallen through. The potential investors had been concerned about the company's inability to retain key talent and the sudden loss of what would have been their flagship client. Bryce had been placed on administrative leave, and they were cutting staff by 30%. Meanwhile, Marlowe Solutions was growing. The successful implementation for the Dutch company led to inquiries from other logistics firms in their network. 6 months after our launch, we had 3 major clients and a growing reputation for responsive service and innovative solutions. An anonymous blog post circulated within the startup community, describing how a female executive had been fired before a major deal closed, only to take the client with her to a new venture. The post didn't name names, but it didn't need to. The message was clear: talent and relationships matter more than corporate hierarchy. 1 year after being escorted from the Cavernix building with a cardboard box of personal items, I stood on a stage at a SaaS conference in New York, sharing our case study on keeping promises to clients in the age of mass layoffs. The room was packed, and as I described our approach to client relationships based on transparency, direct access to technical teams, and consistent delivery, I could see people taking notes. I didn't mention Cavernix by name. I didn't need to. The results spoke for themselves. Marlowe Solutions had surpassed $6 million in annual revenue, and we'd just declined an acquisition offer of $25 million. We were growing on our terms, building something sustainable rather than chasing the next funding round. After my presentation, a young woman approached me, her expression earnest. "Your story gives me hope," she said. "I was let go from my company last month, right after landing a major client." I smiled, recognizing the same fire in her eyes that had fueled me during those first difficult weeks. "The best revenge is building something better," I told her. "When they undervalue your contribution, prove your worth by creating something they can't." As we chatted, my phone buzzed with a message from Lucas. Their parent company was expanding our contract to include 2 additional subsidiaries. The message ended with a personal note: "Best decision we ever made was working with you instead of them." Later that evening, as I shared the news with our now 20-person team during our weekly video call, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey. The firing that had seemed so devastating had actually been the push I needed to build something true to my vision. A company where contributions were valued, promises were kept, and clients were partners rather than transactions. When people ask me about the secret to our success, they're often looking for some technical insight or market strategy. But the truth is simpler: we succeeded because we recognized that in the digital age, trust is still the most valuable currency. Software can be copied, features can be replicated, but relationships built on consistent delivery and genuine problem-solving are irreplaceable. As I ended my keynote at the conference with the line that would become something of a personal mantra, the audience rose in spontaneous applause. They cut me 48 hours before a $2 million deal, so I took the deal. And I built something better. But the real victory wasn't in taking the deal, or even in building a successful company. It was in creating a culture where what happened to me would never happen to anyone else, where talent was nurtured, contributions were recognized, and success was shared. And that, as it turns out, was the best revenge of all. The first year of running Marlowe Solutions taught me more about business than my entire career up to that point. Without the safety net of corporate resources, every decision carried real weight. When you're bootstrapping a company, there's no room for the kind of wasteful spending I'd witnessed at Cavernix, no unnecessary executive retreats, no vanity projects that never reached the market. We operated lean by necessity, but that constraint fostered creativity. Instead of throwing money at problems, we solved them through innovation and elbow grease. Our office space was modest, just enough room for our growing team, with meeting areas that doubled as collaborative workspaces. Unlike Cavernix's gleaming downtown location with its impressive views and largely empty conference rooms, every square foot of our space served a purpose. The Dutch logistics contract became our blueprint for success. We applied the lessons learned there to each new client, understand their business thoroughly before proposing solutions, involve their team in the development process, and be transparent about capabilities and timelines. No overpromising, no glossy sales presentations divorced from technical reality. 6 months after launching, we faced our first major crisis. A critical update to the Dutch company's system failed during deployment, potentially disrupting their operations across 3 countries. At Cavernix, this would have triggered an escalation process involving multiple layers of management and hours of delay. Instead, I personally joined the emergency call at 2 a.m. alongside our lead developers. We worked directly with their IT team, identified the issue within an hour, and had a fix deployed before their morning shift began. No finger pointing, no bureaucracy, just focused problem solving. The next day, Lucas sent a message that we later framed in our office. This is why we chose Marlowe. When something breaks, you fix it, you don't hide behind processes. That incident became legendary within the logistics industry. Word spread about how we handled the crisis, leading to inquiries from companies we hadn't even approached yet. Our reputation for accountability became our most effective marketing tool. As we grew, maintaining that direct connection with clients became challenging. The temptation to add layers of account management was strong, especially as we expanded beyond my personal network. But I remembered how frustrated clients had been with Cavernix's structure, where technical issues were filtered through non-technical staff, creating a game of telephone that distorted both problems and solutions. Instead, we developed what we called the direct line model. Every client had access to both a business contact and a technical lead who understood their specific implementation. No gatekeepers, no communication barriers. When a client called with a problem, they reached someone who could actually solve it, not someone who would merely log a ticket. This approach required intensive training for our team. Everyone, regardless of their role, needed to understand our clients' businesses and the technical foundations of our solutions. We invested heavily in internal knowledge sharing, with weekly sessions where team members presented on different aspects of our clients' operations and our technical architecture. The results were transformative. Our client retention rate reached 98%, unheard of in an industry where churn was typically 15 to 20% annually. More importantly, our team developed a deep sense of ownership and pride in their work. They weren't just filling roles. They were directly responsible for our clients' success. As our reputation grew, so did interest from investors. Venture capital firms that had passed on meetings during our early days now pursued us aggressively, offering terms that would have seemed miraculous a year earlier. The temptation to take the money was strong. It would have accelerated our growth and provided personal financial security after months of uncertainty. But the strings attached to those offers gave me pause. The VCs wanted rapid expansion, a focus on metrics that would position us for acquisition, and governance changes that would dilute our control over the company's direction. Essentially, they wanted us to become what we had deliberately set out not to be, another Cavernix. After one particularly aggressive pitch meeting, I gathered our leadership team, now including Alex, May, and 3 other key people who had joined us along the way. We spread the term sheets across the conference table in our modest office, along with financial projections for both organic growth and VC-fueled expansion. We could grow faster with this money, Alex acknowledged, pointing to the most generous offer. We could hire more developers, expand into new markets. May nodded but looked troubled. But at what cost to our culture? To the way we work with clients. We spent hours debating the options, weighing the security of additional capital against the freedom of continued independence. In the end, the decision came down to a simple question: what kind of company did we want to build? Did we want to optimize for a quick exit, maximizing short-term value for investors? Or did we want to create something sustainable that embodied our values, something that might grow more slowly but would remain true to our vision? The answer became clear when we revisited our client testimonials. They hadn't chosen us because we were the biggest or the most well-funded. They had chosen us because we were responsive, honest, and effective. Taking venture funding might compromise the very qualities that had made us successful. We declined all the VC offers, choosing instead to fund our growth through revenue. It meant making harder choices about which opportunities to pursue and which to pass on. But it preserved our autonomy and our client-first approach. That decision proved pivotal when, 18 months after our founding, the market shifted dramatically. A global economic downturn led many companies to slash their technology budgets, and several of our competitors who had raised massive rounds found themselves with unsustainable burn rates and demanding investors. While they conducted layoffs and scaled back innovation to preserve cash, we continued to invest in our product and our people. Our financial discipline meant we could weather the storm without compromising our commitments to either clients or employees. In fact, we hired several talented people who had been let go from VC-backed competitors, strengthening our team at a time when technical talent was suddenly more available. By our second anniversary, Marlowe Solutions had grown to 45 employees, serving clients across Europe and North America. Our annual revenue exceeded $10 million, and we were consistently profitable, a rarity in an industry obsessed with growth at all costs. We had opened a second office in Amsterdam to better serve our European clients, with Lucas's former technical lead joining us to head the operation. The most gratifying development, however, was the culture we had built. Unlike Cavernix, where information was hoarded and success was attributed to executives regardless of who did the actual work, Marlowe Solutions operated on radical transparency. Everyone knew our financial position, our challenges, and our opportunities. Contributions were recognized regardless of title or tenure, and success was celebrated collectively. This approach wasn't just morally satisfying, it was strategically advantageous. When people understand the why behind decisions and feel ownership of outcomes, they make better choices and solve problems more creatively. Our team didn't need constant supervision or elaborate incentive systems. They were intrinsically motivated by the impact of their work. The contrast between our culture and Cavernix's became even more apparent when, 2.5 years after my firing, I ran into Bryce at an industry conference in Chicago. He had landed on his feet after being pushed out of Cavernix, taking a position with a larger tech company. But the encounter was still awkward. "Jenna," he said, extending his hand with forced casualness. "I've been following your success. Impressive work." "Thank you," I replied, accepting the handshake briefly. "How have you been?" He launched into a carefully curated narrative about his new role and the exciting challenges he was tackling. But his eyes kept darting to the Marlowe Solutions booth nearby, where 3 of our team members were demonstrating our latest platform to an engaged audience. "I always knew you had potential," he said finally, in what I suppose he meant as a compliment. If circumstances had been different at Cavernix, I smiled, not unkindly. Circumstances weren't different, though. Were they? And honestly, I should thank you. If you hadn't fired me, I might never have started Marlowe Solutions. He blinked, clearly unsure how to respond to my directness. "Well, these things have a way of working out for the best," he managed finally. "They certainly do," I agreed, though I suspect Cavernix's investors might disagree. I'd heard through industry channels that Cavernix had eventually secured a much smaller Series C than originally planned, and at terms that heavily favored the investors. They had pivoted away from logistics after losing the Dutch deal, focusing on less specialized markets where they faced more competition and thinner margins. Their valuation had stagnated while ours continued to grow. As Bryce excused himself to take a call, I rejoined my team at our booth. They hadn't needed me to close the demonstration. The potential client was already scheduling a follow-up meeting. I felt a surge of pride watching them work, not because they were representing my company, but because they were representing our company, something we had built together. Later that evening, at dinner with our Chicago-based team members, the conversation turned to our origin story. Many of the newer employees had heard versions of it, but they were curious about the details. "Is it true you decided to start the company the same day you were fired?" asked Rachel, one of our recently hired project managers. "Pretty much," I confirmed. Though I'd be lying if I said I had it all figured out that day, I just knew I couldn't let 3 years of relationship building go to waste. "And you really built the first version in 6 weeks?" asked Jake, a developer who had joined us 6 months earlier. Alex laughed. 6 weeks of barely sleeping, Jenna would be coding at 3 a.m., then on calls with the Dutch team at 6 a.m., then back to coding by 9. I'm not sure she slept at all that first month. "It wasn't just me," I reminded him. We all put in those hours. And it wasn't just about proving Cavernix wrong. It was about proving to ourselves that we could build something better, something that reflected our values, not just our technical capabilities. Speaking of values, May interjected, did you know that 3 of our competitors have tried to poach me in the last year? One offered almost double my salary. This was news to me. Why didn't you tell me we could have discussed compensation if that was a concern? She shook her head. It wasn't about the money. I told them I wouldn't leave for any amount. Where else would I have the creative freedom I have here? Where else would my ideas be taken seriously, regardless of my title? Her words resonated around the table. For all the challenges we'd faced, the long hours, the financial uncertainties, the technical complexities, we'd created an environment where people felt valued and empowered. That, more than any metric or milestone, was what I was most proud of. As the conversation continued, I found myself reflecting on the journey. The day I was fired had felt like an ending, a devastating blow to a career I had worked so hard to build. Instead, it had been the beginning of something far more meaningful than I could have imagined. The lesson wasn't just about resilience or entrepreneurship, it was about the power of authentic relationships and genuine value creation. In a business landscape often dominated by shortcuts, growth hacks, and financial engineering, we had succeeded by focusing on the fundamentals, solving real problems, keeping our promises, and treating both clients and colleagues with respect. 3 years to the day after being escorted from the Cavernix building, I stood in our Amsterdam office, watching as our team celebrated the signing of our largest contract, yet a global implementation for a shipping conglomerate that would double our annual revenue. The champagne flowed as team members from both our locations joined via video conference, their faces reflecting the pride we all felt in what we had accomplished together. As the celebration continued around me, I stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the canal. The evening air was crisp, and the lights of the city sparkled on the water below. I thought about how far we had come from that coffee shop where I had first proposed my alternative to Lucas. How many obstacles we had overcome, how many doubts we had conquered. The door opened behind me, and Lucas joined me at the railing. We had moved beyond the client-vendor relationship years ago, becoming friends and mutual advisors as both our organizations grew. Quite a night, he said, clinking his glass against mine. From a crazy idea in a coffee shop to this, I don't think either of us imagined this outcome 3 years ago. I certainly didn't, I admitted. I was just trying to salvage something from a bad situation. I never planned to build a company. Sometimes the best things aren't planned, he observed. Sometimes they're born from necessity or even adversity. I nodded, thinking of all the unexpected turns our journey had taken. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Cavernix hadn't fired me, if we had gone through with the original deal? Lucas considered this for a moment. Based on what I've seen of their other implementations, it would have been a disaster. They would have overpromised, underdelivered, and we would have been stuck with a system that didn't meet our needs. So, while their decision was terrible for them, it was fortunate for us. And for me, I added. As painful as it was at the time, it forced me to create something of my own, something better than I could have built within their constraints. To unintended consequences, Lucas said, raising his glass in a toast. And to building something better, I responded, completing what had become our unofficial motto. As we rejoined the celebration inside, I caught sight of our company values, artfully displayed on the wall of our Amsterdam office just as they were in Chicago. Solve real problems, keep your promises, share success, build relationships, not just software. Always leave things better than you found them. Simple principles, but ones that had guided us through every decision, every challenge, and every triumph. They were the antithesis of the culture that had led to my firing at Cavernix, and they were the foundation of everything we had built since. They cut me 48 hours before a $2 million deal, thinking they could simply replace me with someone more compliant, someone who wouldn't demand recognition or compensation for their contributions. They saw me as a cost to be eliminated rather than an asset to be valued. But in doing so, they inadvertently set me free. Free to build something authentic, something aligned with my values, something that proved my worth in the most definitive way possible. And that freedom to create, to lead, to define success on my own terms was worth far more than any bonus they had tried to withhold. They cut me, but I didn't fall. I soared,